it's a controversial topic, I should say. The people on the left call them ghost guns because it sounds scarier, and they love drumming up fear in people to make them against things.
Great. Now ghosts can have guns.
Yeah.
That's going to be pretty scary. Welcome back to Reason Together, the podcast for Christians who think about stuff. I'm your host, Daniel Fox, here with my great friend, Thomas Balsamo. How are you, Tom?
Hey, doing good.
Good. Great to jump into another episode. And as we do right at the outset, we want to thank our patrons at patreon.com/Reason Together for supporting this endeavor. And if you're an elite patron, you know that you've received a free t-shirt. You have access to the patron community, as all the patrons do. And you also get the after show. And I have to say, I guess maybe it wasn't an after show in particular, but I should listen to our podcast more so I know what I think about stuff. But I listened to an episode recently, and I really enjoyed it. And it was
our own podcast.
It was our own podcast. And Rossby, I want to thank you because he did this of his own initiative. He put together a compilation from 2022 of funny moments. And so basically it's a track of us laughing over different little things here and there. And it's about 20 minutes, 15, 13?
Probably. 15. You're, wow. I'm surprised you didn't listen to that sooner. That came out, when was that, December? Where have you been?
Yeah, I didn't, I honestly, I don't think I had noticed it until I had my, whether, I don't know that I had done it directly, but your phone says save space by deleting unused apps. Well, I haven't really used Signal, so it knocks Signal out. And that's how we communicate amidst our editors and things like that. Well, so I re-downloaded it, and so I'm seeing these old messages. Maybe that's where I saw it, that he had made that, and went back. I really enjoyed that. So if you want to hear just a laugh fest for about 15 minutes, have at that one. That was about December 22nd, maybe 2022.
Probably, yeah.
But I don't think it was a bonus. It wasn't like an after show. It was just a bonus episode for everybody to listen to.
Right. Yeah. It's just a bonus. And careful listeners will note that probably 99% of the laughing done was yours on there.
At least in terms of volume.
I mean, and only because of the two of us, your laugh is contagious. Mine is just kind of bland and ordinary. Your laugh is contagious. So, in the editing, he just grabbed your laughs. It seems just whatever seemed contagious and funny and stuck it in there. Just so happens to be all yours.
Yeah.
So I'm happy to listen to that. I remember smiling through the whole thing.
Yeah. And it reminded me of stories I had forgotten. I loved, like that lady in your church, Pastor Tom. That I love that one. And then your paper. Your paper. I think it was in college. I mean, who can ever forget? That. A disproportionate man's guide to pants. That's fantastic. I mean, Library of Congress. Okay.
Oh boy.
Anyway, so
let's go.
Let's do it. Okay. What do you want to cue us up with here?
Oh man. Okay. So you have several on here. I have a short one. This one's probably just a quick one here. Probably no need to spend a lot of time on it because really you could almost answer it with just a yes or no. However, that is not our custom. So you remember at a certain point in Jesus' ministry, he sends the disciples out for the first time on what is essentially a short-term missions trip. Mm-hmm. And prior to this moment, they did not ever have the opportunity or ability to heal or cast out unclean spirits or do anything like that. They were essentially students of Jesus. And finally, he sends them out. I think it's Matthew chapter 10, thereabouts. Sends them out 2 by 2, which is a whole nother discussion, but sends them out and gives them the ability to do these miraculous things. There's no indication for us that any of the disciples were unable or unwilling to perform these miracles. It just seems implicit that all of them did these things. And later, when Jesus is betrayed by Judas, there are some things that Jesus says to him or about him, essentially, that it would have been better had he not been born. He's referred to elsewhere as a son of perdition. He seems to bear little, if any, evidence at all of a believer, especially in the final moments of his life. So most conclude that Judas was probably not saved.
Went into his own place.
Right. Good point. So did Judas do miracles on this missions trip?
Well, just as you've stated, it really doesn't tell us exactly. It's sort of assumed that he did, though it never says any of the names particularly did or didn't. We sort of assumed that all had the ability and all used that ability in that trip. So we can't say conclusively, though it's a possibility. What's interesting to me, you said you think that's in like Matthew 10?
Yeah.
Okay. That you look back at Matthew chapter 7 and you wonder what bit of, in some ways, foreshadowing, but even a context that it gives there. When in Matthew chapter 7, verse 15, he says, beware of false prophets. When in 14, he says, straight is the gate, narrow is the way that leads unto a life, and few there be that find it. And he says later in verse 22, many will say to me in that day, Lord, Lord, have we not prophesied in thy name, in thy name cast out devils, and in thy name done many wonderful works? And he goes on to say, then will I profess unto them, I never knew you. And so to realize that among his own ranks, that there was one that likely didn't know him and yet could do mighty works. And you
Very
say,
good.
well, thanks. And you think, well, was he a false prophet? He would have had the right message, and yet without a relationship himself.
Right.
Interesting.
Yeah, and that's why I would think if he was unable to cast out demons, then you would think the disciples would have noticed that. Likely they shared stories when they came back from this.
Right.
You would
If he
think
was the only one that couldn't,
if
it
he
would
was
be
the
like
only one, you'd say, what's wrong with that guy? And then later on at the Last Supper or close to it, they're discussing, Jesus mentions the idea of a betrayer, and they're all asking, is it I? Is it I? Is it I? No one really said, well, hey, he's the guy that couldn't do miracles. Maybe
Right.
there's something wrong with him.
Right.
There's no suspicion at all of him.
That
it
is
seems.
pretty
In fact,
amazing.
they all suspected themselves in some way.
Yep.
And so, yes, it does appear that Judas probably was able to cast out demons, which I can understand, because if I were a demon and I was trying to cover for this guy, Judas, I would just leave. If he were to cast me out, I'd be like, all right, I'm going. It helps his legitimacy. I would just be essentially working with him on this matter. Not that Judas, and I don't know that Judas was always aware of his soul's condition. I suspect he likely wasn't. But the healing thing is certainly interesting, because if Judas is going about healing disease, well, that's not in cooperation with a demon or an unclean spirit.
Right. No.
He does seem to have the ability to heal. And it's like that kind of breaks my brain a little bit. Here's a man who's not saved, who's going to be the betrayer, and yet God has given him the ability to heal. And it reminded me in some ways of King Saul. Who,
in what way?
Well, I mean, you remember he prophesied?
Yes, right.
Instead of him that he prophesied. And there's, of course, debate whether or not Saul was truly saved or not. I tend to lean towards him not being saved. Can't know that for sure, but it certainly is interesting to think that God would allow him to prophesy. In a similar way that God enabled an unsaved man like Judas to heal diseases.
Yeah, interesting. I'm thinking of spin-off questions as you're talking here, real quick, and we don't have to spend a whole lot of time here. But my wife was just recently reading this story to my youngest two girls of Saul and the witch at Endor, and you remember that she summons Samuel, right? Do you have a thought on whether that was a true summoning of Samuel, or whether that was a fake.
I do have some notes on it from when I taught through that.
Yeah.
And as embarrassing it is to say, I don't really remember my position on the subject.
Yeah. Well, I was similar in I know I've studied that, and I think at
what was
least
the reference?
I do not know.
Don't know. Okay.
But anyway, if you take it as being at all legitimate, and that when she was scared, that wasn't part of her spiel, like part of her thing, that she acts scared, and the whole process of supposedly revealing. If you take it as she actually was scared, that she did not anticipate this Samuel coming forth, then it looks in some ways legitimate. And one thing is that Samuel, I believe, reveals a fact that she wouldn't know. Although some people say, well, it was basically, the handwriting was on the wall. They were going to be defeated the next day. But anyway, my daughter asks this question, and I'm throwing this out there because talking about Saul's salvation, whether he's saved. And again, not that I've concluded, but it is an interesting question that Samuel, if you take it as a legitimate manifestation of Samuel, says to Saul, "You will be with me tomorrow." Does that mean you will be with me in the grave, or does that mean you will be with me in paradise? In a similar way, David says of his baby, "I will go to be with him, but he will not come to be with me." Remember? So anyway, just an interesting thought there. Now back to.
Yeah, I'm looking for my note. I don't know that I'm prepared to launch out into that one without finding my note here.
That's fine, and I don't want to really launch into that. To go back to Judas healing, it makes me ask kind of a practical question of application in our day. If a man who likely was unsaved could preach the right message, even with the power to heal and to cast out demons, then wouldn't it be fair to say that an unsaved man could have the ability, certainly, to preach the gospel? We might even say, and see results.
Yes.
Yeah. And
yeah,
yet,
I agree.
And yet it's not the results that should be comforting to him regarding his own eternal destiny, but rather the assurance of a relationship with the Lord.
Yeah, no, I agree, because it is the gospel that is the power of God unto salvation, not the preacher.
I mean, typically we would think probably, well, if somebody doesn't love the Lord, they're not going to want to preach his message. They're going to be a false prophet, right? They're going to be saying something wrong. But to realize that somebody could actually not know the Lord and yet preach the right message, and that message would work in the lives of people. You might see some souls genuinely saved, which he doesn't even have, but the message, the power of the gospel works in them. Interesting.
Yeah, that we don't have to go into it today, honestly, but I've been studying through the Donatist controversy, or the Donatist schism, which, love them or hate them, the Donatists were effectively a very extreme group in which they would delegitimize the preaching or even the ordination of a person if someone sat on their ordination council who was someone they didn't agree with. And essentially what you could say about the Donatists is that they believe the power of the preaching came from the man. And that's why if there was a man who was not viewed in their eyes as legitimate on your ordination council when you became a preacher, it delegitimized you.
Interesting.
Yeah. And essentially they were doing the same thing. They couldn't wrap their mind around the idea that someone who, was someone they disagreed with could actually say a right thing. And the fact is, I think there are preachers today who they may not be regenerate themselves, but are they saying things that could draw someone toward the gospel? Yes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah.
All right. Do you have another one, or can we? Do you have a preference?
We can move on. Go ahead.
I just see this one and I say, let's deal with this one. This I think will be simple enough. It's kind of a two-sided or two-parted question by our elite patron James here. And he says, "Thanks for the great content lately. I want to know what you guys think about church security teams." This is kind of
Mm.
a rising trend, if you will, in churches. He said, "Security teams, concealed carry in church, and how a Christian or church should respond to those kinds of threats and dangers. Here's his question: Is having a security team a wise thing to do, or even a necessity in today's world? Is it appropriate for a layman or even a pastor to carry in church?" And then a more hypothetical question. So this is the second part here. We can deal with them one at a time. If the government outlaws guns, should a Christian own a gun or give them up? So on church security teams and concealed carry for a believer, is that appropriate, or does it betray a lack of trust or faith?
No, it's completely appropriate. Can it be a lack of faith for some? Yes. The fact of the matter is, I can either have faith in God to protect me when I do nothing, or I can have faith in God to protect me using whatever skills He's given me.
Good.
So no, it doesn't betray a lack of faith to have a church security team. Frankly, I am for those. I think that they're in some places very necessary, maybe more so in some places than in others. But no, I think it's a good thing.
I would agree to a point. I think it's you gotta consider that just as a ministry, like, well, we're a church, we have to have a security team. Well, I've never carried a gun, but I'll strap this baby on and keep this
No,
place
no, no, no,
safe.
no.
Yeah, you're like, okay, no, actually, you have to have security in a safe way, obviously, because that's the point. You're trying to
Right.
protect the church. Well, if giving a certain person a certain ability that he's not trained or has the, self-awareness or temperance to use, then you're actually not protecting the church. You're putting it at a pretty significant liability.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, no, I agree. I think
yeah,
training is necessary.
yeah. And honestly, we wouldn't even necessarily say that every security team has to be armed. In our security, protocol here,
I would kind of say it's pretty close to necessary,
yeah,
in my opinion.
yeah.
But they
Well,
need to be trained.
yeah. Well, in our scenario, the security person locks the doors, or supposed to, at a certain time, and so already there's sort of a hindrance to entrance into the building. There are security cameras, and he carries an iPad that can show him the security cameras, so he can even have um, an awareness of someone approaching the building prior to their even pounding on the door.
Mhm.
And then should someone get in, we do not discourage as pastors, and we're fine if people conceal carry who aren't technically the security team. They're just people.
Right.
And so,
Sure.
so if someone is on the security team, meaning he monitors the halls, he locks the doors, he keeps an eye on the cameras, he has access to the transmitter that calls the pagers in need of help. If he's not used to carrying, in our particular situation, we don't make them carry. We don't say anything about really carrying.
Yeah.
That's just not kind of part of the write up
Yeah.
there. But
Well, to be fair, in your part of the country, it is more prone for people to want to do that, I think. Where I live, I mean, we're having our Second Amendment rights stripped away from us every single day, it seems. I kid you not. I'm not even exaggerating that. His Lamont's legislative agenda for Connecticut just came out the other day, and it's just constant, a barrage of attacks against our Second Amendment rights here.
Wow.
But to be clear, I do carry a concealed weapon pretty much everywhere, including church. And in our church, the size of our church, I am essentially the security team because we don't have a big church. And the layout of our building is such that it's a small storefront. I'm watching the door the whole time.
Right.
I'm
You're the
up
one
at the front.
facing the door.
I'm
You
the one
see who's
facing the
coming in.
door.
Right.
And we have one point of entrance and one point of egress in the entire building.
Mm-hmm.
And the point of egress is behind me where I'm at the pulpit. So in the case of an emergency, our people know that if I yell threat or something like that, the people are to exit through the back. They're to get down, get low, get out through the back of the building. I'm heading for the front.
Mhm.
You know what I mean? It's going to vary. Church security is going to vary depending on your church building. There needs to be some sort of strategy for your specific building type and style. Where are the points of entrance? Where are the points of egress? Where are there places where you can have locked doors and so on and so forth? And it's also going to vary depending on the people you have. Since
Right.
our church is
Sure.
small, we don't need a whole team of people. So right now I carry a concealed weapon at church. However, I've had some advanced training on those things. I'm not
Right.
just some dude with a concealed carry permit
It
license.
really is a serious thing
Yeah.
to
Um,
carry.
sure, it absolutely is. And if you're going to do that, you really do need to be prepared to use it. It's not just a safety blanket that you carry around, a security blanket. You really do need to be prepared mentally
Hmm.
to use it if you had to, and be prepared for the potential consequences.
Right.
I do have insurance that does provide for litigation in the event that I do have to use that.
Hmm.
It's not expensive, but it is something that I do recommend. And I even recommend, as far as for churches, to have some sort of occasional in-service or training on something like this. I had some training not too many years ago. It's known as Alice training, or have you heard of this, Alice?
It sounds a little familiar, but I couldn't tell you anything about it. So explain.
Yeah, I'm not trained as an instructor in it. That I just don't have the time for that. I have been a student of it, though. It's an acronym. It stands for Alert, Lockdown, Inform, Counter, and Evacuate. And it is essentially sort of a run hide fight protocol, if I can
Hmm.
say it that way.
Hmm.
So it prioritizes certain responses in an active shooter situation, or
Hmm.
really any situation. Is here's what you do first: you alert, make sure there's notification of the danger. Lock down. In other words, you don't want to immediately try to engage all the time. And then inform. Communicate to other people. Where is this intruder? Where is he coming from? What does he look like? And so on. Pass along information, and then counter is not necessarily fighting. It's essentially distracting and moving, creating some sort of noise or something like that, just to try and disorient. And then evacuate is obviously the end goal, is to get off the X, get out of danger as
Hmm.
quickly as possible.
Hmm.
This is the training that's often used in places where people are not permitted to carry firearms, or
Yes.
not
Yeah.
interested in carrying firearms,
Hmm. So there
like
is no other
schools.
defense. I mean, as far as you can't engage with them on a firearm basis, so you have to find other ways to distract and evacuate
Right.
and all those things. Yeah.
Right. I had training on this at our workplace, where I work. We've not done it at the church yet, just because, like I said, I'm the security team. I can explain at least the basics of this to our people, and we're a pretty small, unassuming church. Our building is laid out in a certain way, so we've not gone through the formality of it at church, but it should be at least made aware to most churchgoers how to respond if someone yells threat, 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 or gun or something like that in an emergency, so that everyone's not running in all different directions, so that people don't end up standing like deer in the headlights. They should know, get down and head in a certain direction, get down and head away. There should be some sort of protocol in place to make people aware. Some security teams at churches go as far as running drills, active shooter drills.
Hmm.
I got to say, with what my thoughts are about training, I'm not opposed to that. It does seem a bit extreme, and it might even be unnerving for some churchgoers to have to run through a drill like that.
Right. Yes.
But I kind of say there's a place for it. Um,
And
yeah,
I just want to make the comment, to might have a wide variety, obviously, of churches and size and structure and all that stuff. So to say that security team isn't so much the focal point, it's the safety of your church. And
right,
so, who do you have? What's your budget? Just several different things come into play. Ultimately, you want your people to be safe. If you don't really have trained people with guns. And I honestly, personally, I would recommend in your church security policy that you don't say anything about a gun personally. Now, at least for us here, because again, as a matter of liability, if you're going to require guns, then
Right.
that's putting a pretty big stake in the game and requiring training and bringing liability on
Yeah.
yourself. But if you just leave it as an unsaid, that if he does, he does. If he doesn't, that's his judgment call. You need to talk to your insurance company about that.
Yeah.
But the point is,
I
if you don't,
agree.
if you don't
I agree,
have
but
that,
there should be training still. I
yep,
would encourage folks, and I actually said this at a recent meeting we had at our church where we talked about church security is the topic of, concealed carry in church came up. And I said, I'm for it if you would like to do that. I'm not going to tell you that you have to or that you should,
right.
but I'm not going to tell you that you can't. I will just say that if you're going to do something like that, whether you're at church or anywhere, you should have some sort of advanced training on how to use that under duress, under
Yes, right,
stress.
right.
So
Right. And so if
yeah.
people don't, you're just asking, how can I keep my church the safest? And if it's something as simple as just posting a fire drill kind of a thing, like a map, where do I go? Reminding the people occasionally that if something were to happen, remember to keep a cool head. This is what we need to do. These are the first couple steps, whatever. You want to keep your people safe within the bounds that you have at your disposal, within the things that you have at your disposal. It's like a bus ministry. It's not that, oh, well, everybody's got to have a bus ministry, right? If we're going to be a spiritual, we're going to be like a productive, good church, we have to have a bus ministry. No, you need to do what you're supposed to do in your locale with the tools that you
Right.
have. That's the most effective. And same thing with the
Sure.
safety of your church. Now,
Sure.
to transition to that second question, if the government outlaws guns, which, like you're saying, in your area, there's really more of an assault on that right. Should a Christian own a gun? So should he say, no, this is my God-given right to have a gun. I'm going to keep it, or do I just say, look, I'm going to give it up, and from that point, trust the Lord?
This is reminiscent of a conversation we had on this podcast a long time ago. And
okay, give me just a minute to go back and listen to see what I said. No.
Well, this is one of those topics where my thinking on it has evolved a little bit. And I used to be of the impression that, when it talks about obeying government in the Bible, that statement is so absolute that if the government here in the United States told us that we cannot have guns anymore, that means we just have to just comply. To be a good Christian, we have to comply with that. And it's not quite that simple. It like many arguments, it's not that simple. So, I mean, if you understand the way in which the world was when these scriptures were written, they were under an empire,
right?
Whose governmental
monarchy.
power was absolute. Mm-hmm. And we are not living under an empire. In fact, we're living in a government in which the entire spirit of the founders and the founding documents, and you can even find principles like this in our founding documents, particularly the Declaration of Independence, which is a founding document of this country. It's not the same as the Constitution, but it's one of our founding documents. But the spirit and attitude of our founding documents is that if government becomes tyrannical, our government essentially says, in the spirit of its founding, disobey us. Mm-hmm. That's what makes it unique. So how can I be disobedient to a government that tells me if we become tyrannical, you should disobey? Because that's essentially what they were doing, right?
Right.
And like it or not, as a Christian, that is the form of government, that is the spirit of the founding that they placed in our founding documents, that it is our right, it is our duty, in a sense, to use the actual words there, to not comply with certain things.
The difficulty in that is that that's very subjective as to what is tyrannical, and
sometimes, but not with the Second Amendment. It's not subjective because the word infringe means infringe. And it's not the right to own arms. It's the right to keep and bear arms. The idea of not only owning them but carrying them.
Sure.
So in my opinion, the Second Amendment is written in such a way that it is absolute. So when it comes to compliance or non-compliance with laws or rules, like the ATF makes, when it comes to those things, they are infringing on an amendment to the Constitution that enshrines our right to keep and bear arms. So like I say, my opinion on this has changed because not because my principles have changed, but because my understanding of our own government structure has changed. I get it now that what makes the United States form of government unique is that, in a sense, it's baked into the cake, the ability to disobey if our own Constitution is violated.
Now, let me go a step further and just come down to, say, a hypothetical. They show up for your gun, right? I mean, they can make the declaration, 6 o'clock news, the government has just outlawed guns. Please, appear at the police station and turn in your gun. And you go, no. But then someone finds out, Balsamo's got a gun that he hasn't registered yet. And a couple police officers come to your door and they say, Mr. Balsamo, you're in violation of the recent blah, blah, blah rules. We ask you to turn in your gun. At that point, you would turn it in, right? I mean, you wouldn't say, come in and get me, boys, or would you? I mean, at a certain point, like they're gonna outnumber you. And
Yeah.
they're going to take the gun one way or the other. It's not saying they took away your right to have one, because that's enshrined, but they might take away your gun.
Yeah.
At what point do you defend the ability to use your gun even against the people trying to take it away? Or do you just say, look, take the gun?
Well, the thing is, I can't do this in my state, in Connecticut, but the easiest answer to that, or I would say the most elegant solution, is to own guns that they really have no way of knowing about.
Mm-hmm.
And those are known as unserialized firearms.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Some states allow that. Where I live, they do not, unfortunately. But really, that would be the solution, because number one, just because it's, it's a controversial topic, I should say. The people on the left call them ghost guns because it sounds scarier, and they love drumming up fear in people to make them against things.
Great. Now ghosts can have guns.
Yeah.
That's going to be pretty scary.
Boom. Didn't even see it coming. Yeah. But I mean, that would be the most logical solution, because, honestly, I think that the owning of unserialized firearms is permissible according to the Constitution of the United States. Sure. I don't think you need the government's permission to own a firearm. But where I live, if I had something like that here, I get in big trouble. Mm-hmm. I don't want to get in big trouble. I don't want to go to jail for 10 years. I don't want to become a felon. So that would be, maybe to answer your hypothetical question with a hypothetical solution, is, if they come for your guns and you absolutely wanted to comply, and keep yourself out of trouble, give them the ones they know about.
Right.
But like I said, I live in Connecticut. Maybe where you live, that's different. You're allowed to have unserialized firearms.
Yeah.
But
well, thank you for venturing there. That hypothetical questions are fun, aren't they? A lot of times they're just a waste of time.
Yeah. But yeah, that good question, James. I appreciate that. Yeah, thank you for that.
Okay, can I switch gears here and go to something totally different?
Yes.
Okay, we've got
a no for something completely different.
Okay, we got 10 minutes. And considering, looking for a balance here, an understanding. The concept of peace in Scripture, the Old Testament concept of peace, is the idea of wholeness, right? If I remember correctly. So if you shalom, okay, mm-hmm. is the idea of a wholeness, whether it's in your health and in your relationships and, in your person. So you think about peace and soundness or integrity. Integrity is that idea of soundness. When we say a building has a structural integrity, there's no cracks or fissures or, um, I guess, weak points there. So thinking about those, and that I am supposed to be a whole person. Am I whole by strengthening all of my weaknesses, or by playing to my strengths and surrounding myself with people who are strong where I'm weak? Maybe that's the. Um,
Can you give an example?
so should I constantly try to develop myself in every area? Like we should be self-aware enough to say, I have some weaknesses. These are the areas where I'm weak, and I'm strong over here. I have certain gifts or talents. Just more naturally strong, or I've worked in this area. I've developed a strength here, but I know that over here I'm weak in this area. So let's say I'm strong with people, but I'm weak administratively. Okay, do I work to be strong in everything, in every aspect of life? Try to be strong in everything, or do I just recognize I'm always going to have weaknesses? So let me keep playing to my strengths and make up for those weaknesses by, and maybe that I'm half answering my question. Maybe that is strengthening myself just secondarily by, surrounding myself with people that help me with the administrative details, or,
Yeah.
I know this goes in
Well,
different facets of life and stuff, but let's say in a work context, you hire a good administrator and then you play to your strength, or whatever.
yeah, no, I tend to think that you should strengthen your own weaknesses. And that may involve at first surrounding yourself with people who are strong where you're weak.
Mm-hmm.
But the goal should not be to continually have them do everything for you. The goal should be to strengthen your own weaknesses. And the reason I say that is because, when we think about scriptures like 2 Timothy 3, and basically the reason why the Bible is given, all scripture is given by inspiration of God and is profitable for doctrine, for reproof, for correction, for
Good thought.
instruction in righteousness. The reason it says that is because that the man of God may be perfect, thoroughly furnished unto all good works, not the entourage of God, not the presbytery of God, not the team of God, the man of God.
Mm-hmm.
His duty is to be mature. That's the word perfect there, but then thoroughly furnished. And forgive me if my understanding of that phrase is rudimentary, but the idea of thoroughly furnished means that he's adequately prepared in really anything.
Okay.
That to me says that if I'm weak in a certain area, it's not wrong for me to bring someone on board with me that can help me with my weaknesses and in a sense work alongside me to do the things I'm not good at. But the goal should be that I learn from them to strengthen that weakness in myself.
Mm-hmm.
Not that I just bring you on board to do it for me.
I see. Yeah. So practically that's going to be a lifelong pursuit, because it's the concept of a multitude of counselors. Well, when don't we need counsel? When do we ever grow out of a blind spot? I mean, I think we'll always have we're always human. And so there's going to be something where we need someone's input, but we should be, you're saying, growing and strengthening. So a philosophy that would say, just focus on your gift, be extreme and supreme in that area. Do what you do well and let other people do the rest. You feel like that might be problematic if taken too far?
Oh yeah, I think it enables weakness. I think it enables someone to continue, and maybe even laziness at a certain point. It enables someone to say, well, I don't have to develop that area because I have you to do it. That to me is not thoroughly furnished. That's someone who has essentially enabled themselves to not develop areas that are uncomfortable to them.
Now that would be different than, say, than just structurally identifying your role. Not saying that you as a person aren't working to be strong, in in a way to hit everything. You're trying to be complete, trying to be thoroughly furnished through the grace of God. But let's say in an organization, you obviously have a role that you're either the administrator or you're the detail guy. You know what I mean? You're one of the people that works on one of the 72 details of this project, or you're the guy heading up the whole thing. You can't be both.
Right.
And so structurally speaking, you're going to do your thing. You're going to administrate. You're
Right.
not going to worry about the details because that's their job. That's not your job.
Right. That's the difference between roles and skills.
Okay.
I believe that a good Christian man needs to be a skill collector. He needs to, some people collect coins, some people collect, stamps. I don't know if anybody does that stuff anymore, but some people collect, guns, to
Mm-hmm.
circle back. But yeah, I think skills should be something that every man collects, because even though you might hold a certain role and you don't need that skill, what if you had to? Like, what if suddenly you found yourself in a position where you had to play that role, at least temporarily? You don't want to be a completely inept person. You want to be apt in every scenario as much as is reasonably achievable.
Well, and that's what I guess I'm kind of wondering, that even that, breaks down at a certain point, because while you might collect skills, you don't become proficient in all of them. You probably don't become proficient in any of them, except maybe one or two. And that's maybe going back to the original, is that you're good at something. So do you just keep being better at the things that you do? Or do you just constantly try to spend time dabbling in a bunch of things and trying to improve them all at once? Well, I guess it depends maybe whether we're talking practically in skill sets or spiritually or vocationally. Right. But
well, either way, it does sort of, when a man is developing skills in a multitude of areas, whether they be spiritual or practical, there are going to be some of those skills that float to the top that are just more natural to you, more enjoyable to you. And in many ways, by being an explorer and collector of skills, it does help you find what you're naturally good at. And it helps you notice your weaknesses as well. But I think that a good Christian man should seek a little bit of discomfort at times when it comes to the skills that he doesn't have, and develop those. He may never perfect them because they're not his skills. They're not his natural gifting. He'll never perfect them, but he should at least know how to use them if he needs to. He shouldn't be a completely inept person if called upon to do those things.
Okay. And one other kind of parsing between a couple things before we're done here. What's the difference between saying you're trying to be somebody that God didn't make you to be? God made you someone unique with certain skills and ability, versus that idea of being mature and well-rounded. Where's the line between it? Where, at what point, or am I talking in two different spheres where trying to be good at everything, I'm racking my brain, or I'm saying I'm struggling with this so much because it's just not who I am, right? Mm-hmm. And to say that's, I'm trying to make me you, or I'm trying to make me someone else, who's stronger than I am, instead of just being me, and me is good at this. I guess as I'm thinking about it, it's basically saying it's not a comparative game, but people that you see, you say, well, I'm trying to be like them. Don't try to be like them, but they're modeling a strength in a certain facet of life that is an example to you, that can be something that you're strengthening in. So you're not trying to be like someone else, but you're just trying to become stronger, and they happen to be the model for that trait that you're seeing, and yet you're still being you, who is naturally strong in other areas. Does that make sense to me? So it's kind of like, I think it's both in the end, that we are naturally good at certain things, and there ought to be a pursuit of and a slow growth in other areas.
Sure. Yeah. And I'm not advocating for a one-man show. I'm not saying that you should try to essentially nudge everyone else out of your life so that you can do it all. I'm not saying that. But I am saying, though, that when someone says, well, I don't do that because that's just not me. Right. To me, that's kind of a cop-out at times. And it's,
I understand.
It's hard to respect that, because
I agree. It's an excuse for not yet.
Yeah. Now, do I expect that person to master the thing that they're not good at? No. But I don't think they should be making excuses for not doing a thing or learning a skill just because, that's not me.
Right. Yeah, I don't witness because I'm just not a people person. or
Right.
I just can't study like that. I can't memorize because that's just not me. Or
Right.
I just have a bad temper. I can't
Right.
be controlled like that guy. That's just me.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's why I think, statements like that sort of enable cowardice.
Mm.
And, I don't think that's part of being a thoroughly furnished man.
Good.
Get good at all the things you can get good at. And do your best with the things you can't get good at. But be versed in as much as you can. It's
Good.
just a matter of preparedness.
So every Christian ought to be growing, and growth always means change, which means that you're developing something.
Right.
And so, yeah, if I'm asking too broad of a question, listeners, maybe write in and give me some, even pare down the question even more, show it in different spheres. Maybe it's a little bit obscure because it's such a broad question. Give us your feedback, reasontogetherpodcast@gmail.com. We'd love to hear from you. Thanks so much for listening.
Yes, thank you for being here. We are encouraging balance, developing perspective, and connecting faith to practice. This is Reason Together.